And welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sean Wilson. I am the Senior Product Marketing Manager for Deployment. And what I wanted to talk to you today at our broadcast is that we're going to talk about Skype Operations Framework today. I've actually am being joined by a colleague of mine in the engineering team, Brian Nice, longtime consultant, and then has also come into the engineering team to build out this Skype Operations Framework that I'm going to tell you a little bit about. Just before that, I don't want to forget to remind you, make sure that you respond to the pulse. It's a great way for us to understand where and what we are, our effectiveness, what your deployment state is. Helps us tune and guide what we're doing. As well, at the bottom, you've got the Q&A manager, and that's actually really important because it helps you to real-time ask us some questions about what you want to know, but also at the same time, it gives us an idea of the level of altitude if we're at the right level. So let me just take a quick moment and before I pass it over to Brian, you can go to the next slide, but I wanted to take a minute and say, look, the shift to the cloud is requiring a rethink of how partners and customers and enterprises really think about plan, deliver, and operate. If you think of traditional standard methodologies of service management, this falls right in there. But we were going to use an analogy. We kind of went back and forth, but I think it's actually good to use this analogy. If you think of how we historically received water at our home, it was a well, and then we dug the well and then piped water from the well to the house, and then it was distributed through the pipes within the house. Think of that very similarly to how you think of a Skype for Business server or link server infrastructure. You build your infrastructure, you make sure that all of your network's in place, the DNS is there, you've got everything in place, it's all set. With the shift to the cloud, it's very much the similar shift of when the utility company started to deliver water to your house. You're not responsible for the water filtration systems or the wastewater management or even any of the distribution actually to your property. You are actually only responsible for the internal infrastructure within your house. And so what this does is now, think about it, pipes, faucets, things like that. The core of what you're doing is what's on premises, but you're receiving that water from a utility service company. Very similarly to now receiving Skype for Business Online from the cloud. And so as we do talk about this, we want to talk a little bit about what Skype Operations Framework is. And so I'm actually going to pass this over, let Brian introduce himself, and then we're going to kind of walk you through the fundamentals of why the shift is what it is. So welcome, Brian. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, it's definitely a pleasure to be here. So real quick, again, my name is Brian Nice. I am a Principal Program Manager inside of our Skype engineering group, specifically in our customer experience and deployment group. And one of the areas that I focus in on is product readiness and working together with my teams to help build and cultivate and curate this Skype Operations Framework. So when we look at the Skype Operations Framework, in and of itself, at the heart of the framework itself is what we strive for, which is customer success, right? That's really our goal. That's our intent, is to make sure that we can build a framework that at the end of the day is going to give us the success that we desire for our customers, right? When we started looking at that, we realized that it was something that you couldn't really do as just a single vision, if you will. You had to look at it in pieces, right, in segments. And that's what we're kind of showcasing on this slide here in a sense. When we look at the framework itself, right, sure, that framework is going to provide kind of that set of guidance that you need to follow, right, and that set of core assets, as we call them. But there's more to it than just those pieces, right? How do I take those pieces and use them, right? We need a readiness angle, right, to look at that. So you kind of see in this upper right quadrant here, we talk a little bit about the readiness side of things, right? Soft encompasses a readiness piece, which I'm sure we'll talk more about as we go throughout the session here, but I'll put it out there now. The readiness for this is going to be starting on Monday, right? First and foremost, we've got a bunch of training sessions lined up that you're going to be able to get a lot of the underlying knowledge transfer from the folks that actually help build and craft this framework starting on Monday.
Hey, let me ask a quick question while we're there.
Sure.
One of the things we're talking about is we talk about the framework, we're talking about readiness, and really it's that end-to-end deployment methodology, right? That we've now transitioned to the cloud. The big piece is we see customers and partners. Tell me a little bit more about that element and that angle.
Yeah, fantastic question. Because we get this a lot as we started to develop and work through the framework. It was, well, this is just something for partners to look at, right? Or just something for maybe a select set of folks to look through. The great thing about this framework is it is architected, because customer success is central, it's architected for both partners and customers to take a look through. Now, obviously from the partner perspective, right, the idea of this framework is to give them that starting foundation, right? Rather than having partners trying to go off and spend tons of time and resources building their own approach and their own methodology to Skype for Business Online, we're going to lay that framework for them, right? And they can then build on top of that, add in all the value that they need, add in all of the extra bells and whistles that they provide as a great partner, but leveraging that consistent framework, that consistent taxonomy, right?
Excellent.
Customers at the same time, right, they can leverage that framework as well, because there's a lot of practical guidance that's built into the framework. So being able to figure out, how do I get adoption? How do I get my users to develop this habitual use, right? That information is all built in this framework and in a consumable fashion for customers to use as well.
Excellent. One of the things that I want to kind of really take this to the next level is, let's take it to what it is, more at a different layer. If you take the next slide, one of the reasons I wanted to ask this question is why is it important for our customers and our partners to have that common language?
Yeah, it's definitely important to have a common language, so that as we're guiding towards that common goal, we're able to understand and articulate exactly where a customer or partner is in that particular journey to Skype for Business Online. Right? So it was very critical for us to be able to build a taxonomy, right, or a nomenclature that we could use so that we could accurately depict what the journey looks like for a customer to get to Skype for Business Online and where they are in that particular journey and where do they go next.
Excellent. So as we kind of take a look at what it is, there's a couple of key things that really, being a former service manager, it really rings true to my heart to see. But if you think of Moth or ITIL or any of these other IT service management models and methodologies, they all focused on a cyclical, continual service improvement kind of life cycle around plan, deploy, and operate. And we've kind of adjusted that to deliver now and been very cloud-centric with this approach. Why is it important that we understand that continual service improvement in the cloud specifically?
Yeah, fantastic point. And the key word that I want to jump on that you mentioned there is lifecycle, right? And that really is at the heart of the framework itself that we built. As you can see, the visual representation here of it being circular, being a lifecycle style approach, right? Back in the day when we were deploying the earlier iterations of the product and doing a lot of on-premises stuff, it might be years before we got a major release or a major update. Now that we're in the cloud, we're getting information, at a much more rapid pace. We have to iterate much more quickly, which means that we have to take this life cycle approach. We can't just simply look at plan and deliver and operate and then be done, because by the time we're through and managing that operate stage, that next innovation has come through, right? And we have to go back through again and figure out, okay, now we have this new feature that's lit up or this new service that has become available. What do I do? Well, I have to go back through that iterative process again, right? And understand how that affects my plan, my deliver, my operate standpoint.
Excellent. One of the pieces to this though, and for all of you that are joining, a couple of things, make sure you're in Q&A manager as well as Pulse. But one of the ones that I wanted to bring was, we just came back from Worldwide Partner Conference, and this is Microsoft's conference that really we deal with really taking time to work with and educate our partners, like our SI partners, our ISV partners, as well as MSPs and different levels of engagement of partners. And the framework took a really positive spin at the event, seemed to be very positive. And one of the reasons for that, if we go to the next slide, was that we took this three-tiered kind of approach within multiple layers, really, so that we created a common language. We created the recommended practices or best practices that Brian and maybe talk about in a minute. But at the end of this, it's about operational excellence, right? It's about making sure that you deploy the right way every single time, and then you operate it correctly. So tell me a little bit more about how you guys came up with this framework, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, as you can kind of see visually on the slide, the thought process that we went through was we wanted to build a framework that would, as we've mentioned, be consumable by both partners as well as customers, and provide that roadmap of how to get success in the Skype for Business Online deployments, right? So to do that, foundationally, we first had to make sure that we had this common taxonomy, right? That bottom layer that we talked about already. The middle layer was a set of activities and tools and assets, right? We wanted to make sure that we equipped the partners, the customers, what have you, with a consistent set of tools and assets that would help them streamline the ability to get to the desired outcome, right? And that's really where that kind of that operational excellence piece comes in, is what is the initiative, what is the desired outcome that we're trying to achieve, right? And by building this framework in a layered approach, it becomes very modular, so that as our initiatives change or as our outcomes change, we can still go and pull from the various assets and various activities and all of the repository of information that we have in the framework and lead them towards this successful outcome.
Excellent. One of the things I was actually thought I'd also do as we're kind of going through this is really, one of the things we got was a breakdown. We've got a great breakdown of people that are using Skype for Business and Link, as well as partners in the audience. So one of the pieces that we talked about was the fact that this is going to deliver tools and assets to move to the cloud and being able to take your stuff to the next level. The piece for me that really is interesting is we give our customers and our partners access to the information. And that really is to help our customers select the right partners, right? As well as at the same time, being able to deliver and get our partners ready to be able to know what that cloud path looks like. So as we kind of move forward and move over to the next stages, which is really why we created it, I think, Brian, you do a great job of explaining why we had to create it and what was important.
Awesome. And one of the really important pieces that we looked at as we structured this was to not just simply put out a set of documentation, if you will, and then just kind of throw it against the wall and see what sticks. We wanted to make sure that as we built this framework out, that we provided that appropriate readiness angle to go along with it, right? So great, we have this framework, I have this taxonomy, I have these sets of tools and assets. What do I do with them? How do I use this thing? How do I get the value out of the framework itself? And that's where the readiness pieces, when we go through and we'll talk about the sessions coming up through Skype Academy, that give you that foundation to be able to know not just how to speak to the framework and how to leverage and build on top of the framework, but how to actually use the pieces of the framework. All right? How do I get measurable results out of all these good bits of IP that we've just released, right? Good bits of assets, excuse me, that we just released.
I want to call to this because it's really key to understand from outside in. This has been looked at really by our engineering team that has taken a traditional framework and said, okay, how do we apply this at the customer level, and is really engaged actually at the customer level, working with customers to not only build but validate this currently and will be continuously. But as well, we've also got partners out there that are really behind this and backing it. And one of the reasons that I find that that's really important is a lot of times we can put out technical documentation and it's technically accurate, but really it's not an end-to-end methodology. And the one piece that we tend to not think about as much is the operate phase, right? And we always, if you think of traditional implementations, we do planning up front, we deploy, we get a sign off at the end of the deployment, and we walk away. And we have to remember that it's a life cycle. Specifically in online, it's even more of a life cycle because we bring those features in on a pretty regular basis because we're able to innovate and create it. It's not a 3-year deployment cycle with cumulative updates every quarter or so. What it is now I've now got a continuously updating world that has a couple of elements, from service features to the client sides, and really helps us understand why always fresh. And in that cloud is important, but also gives us the core understanding of how to deliver it. Now, right before you go to really the meat of this and what's coming, one of the things I want everybody on the thing to notice is in the top right corner, I've actually given you the link to be able to go check out SkypeOperationsFramework.com. So the links that are in the presentation won't be live, but the ones in the top right corner will take you there. And so as Brian goes and gives you a great deep dive into what's coming and what we've done and developed just for our V1 and what it's coming, I want you to understand you can get there just with a quick link in the top right corner. So Brian, back over to you.
Fantastic. Yeah, and to touch on a quick point that you mentioned there, when we look at kind of the operate phase, from my previous life when I did architect work and consulting work and so forth, a lot of times we would run into situations where, we would get to what we would call the production pilot phase, right? Which was typically maybe about 10% of the users would be deployed. And then we were like, cool, it's on autopilot and life is good. Let's move on to the next, right? And the operate piece kind of fell out of the back of the wagon, right? So did the adoption piece, right? And it kind of got to that point where we weren't helping to drive that habitual use of the platform, thus not even allowing us to get to that stage where we can innovate, right, with new features, because we weren't even getting folks to pick up the basics because we kind of left them there. So yeah, definitely operate is helping us to kind of pull this all the way through and then even circle it back, right, based on as these new innovations come out in the cloud. So the slide that you're seeing here is showcasing to what Sean alluded to earlier. This is V1, right, of the framework. And the reason we kind of couch it as V1 is the thought process here is this framework is a living and breathing entity, right? This is not a once and done, we're going to release it and ship it and then we're off to something else. This is something that's going to be iterated on, right? We're going to be constantly providing updates to the assets that you see kind of mentioned here. We're going to be providing new assets. We're going to be providing new outcomes, right? That's really the way this framework is meant to evolve. Now, obviously we can't eat the elephant right out of the gate, right? Or boil the ocean, whatever your happy statement is there. So we focused on initially this outcome of what we're calling cloud PBX, PSTN conferencing, get deployed, right? So how do I tackle that particular outcome? Right, and what you're seeing on the slide here is the results of countless hours of our engineering folks putting together these assets and tools and so forth, centered around that mission, right? That outcome. I want to get deployed with Cloud PBX and PSTN conferencing.
Cool. A quick question though that I've got for you is one of the things you mentioned. There's a couple things that we have mentioned. We mentioned adoption. There's a couple other elements. I want to talk about envisioning and network in a little bit more depth, right? But really, adoption is one of those things that people try to bucketize into a single section, right? So, but adoption really lives across the entire life cycle. Give me a little more of how you guys are envisioning that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic point. As you start digging around on the website and you start looking at SkypeOperationsFramework.com and you start drilling through, you're going to see a breakdown of the top level phases, the plan, deliver, operate. You're going to see a breakdown into that of 12 stages, and one of the stages in there that you'll see is adopt. But the key point is that's actually an execution piece of adoption. You are spot on in that in our framework, in our life cycle, adoption runs the gamut, start to finish, right? Because we can't wait until stage 8 to start thinking about how we're going to get our users to develop these deep habitual usages of the platform. We need to start that all the way back at Envision, right? And as we're envisioning this overall solution, we also have to now start understanding how am I going to get my end users to adopt this platform. So yeah, it runs all across all of the stages that we have. Even though we do call out a specific stage from an execution standpoint, it's definitely there across all 12 stages.
So for people to understand what we're talking about here, plan, deliver, and operate versus the individual envisioning and assess and determine and the prepare, when we looked at that, the rings with the inner circles, we think of plan, deliver, operate, obviously, as the high level pillars, and underneath that are being held up by these different stages. Will we continue to iterate more in the operate space? Because the plan and deliver looks like we've got a pretty good thing, and then we want to bolster operate. So tell me a little bit more about that in the plan.
Sure, absolutely. And when you look at the slide that we're showcasing here, we are kind of summing up those high level plan, deliver, operate phases that we have, right? And what we've then tried to do inside of this visually is, the areas in blue that you see, these are activities, right? These are, actionable things. And of course, they are tied to the various stages under the hood, and you can see how all that maps on the site. But really, the intent here is to showcase, hey, when I'm in the plan phase, what are the things that I need to be doing there? Well, you need to be envisioning the solution. You need to be assessing your overall readiness. You need to look at your network and assess the network's readiness and so forth. And same thing for deliver. And of course, in operate, you're spot on, right? We have a series of assets currently that are associated with what we call operating in the first month, right? So it's basically, hey, I've gotten this thing up and running. What do I do? Right? What is the first thing that I should be looking at doing now that I have my users deployed in Skype for Business Online? Well, that's our first set for operate. That is, of course, as you mentioned, being iterated so that we can improve upon that. So it's not just what do I do in the first month, but what are the things that I do on an ongoing basis? How do I be more proactive about call quality and things of that nature? So definitely additional assets and additional activities coming for that operate phase.
Excellent. Well, I think there's a build to this slide, and I think there's a real call out for it. Really, is that we have done pretty extensive development within SOF. We're going to deliver over 60 different assets. One of the key assets within this, and I go to SkypeOperationsFramework.com, download the different tools and practices right now, start reviewing it. There's some other key call outs, but the big one here is the network assessment piece, right? We want to ensure success within our customer, and we know that first one is that it's a network assessment. So customers go and engage with a partner to be able to deliver those network assessments. Make sure your network is prepared end to end. On the contrary to that, partners, hey, go and start consuming this, start getting up to speed on that, start to join the different sessions for the network elements as well, and envisioning workshops, because they're all critical, but the network, we know it can be the linchpin in success. So we have developed clear guidance on what to do to get your network prepared, make sure you meet the thresholds you need to meet. And actually in a previous session with Jamie and Hal, they went through the network requirements, and we've built this framework around how to go and assess against those requirements for Skype for Business Online. So I think the next one that we really want to talk about is what's next? What can people expect, Brian? So that they know that it's the life cycle.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, you saw on the last slide, there's well over 60 assets that we've thrown into V1. And again, as we mentioned, these assets that we're putting together are written by and worked through our customer engineering folks working with select partners and select customers, right? So these are actually field tested, if you will, assets that we're putting through. But of course, we couldn't get everything all out the door in V1. So as part of our lifecycle approach, what we're looking to do is not just continue to iterate on the assets that we have, right? So as to your point, you mentioned, the network readiness piece. So there are, definitely a lot of good things that we're covering in V1 for network readiness. That's going to continue to evolve. So those assets will continue to evolve along with it. On top of that, obviously, as the solution and the service itself evolves, so will SOF, right? So we're going to tie ourselves to the roadmap. As things are evolving in the roadmap for Skype for Business and new features or new services are coming online, we'll incorporate those as necessary into the framework itself, right? Key point being living and breathing framework, right? Yeah. We really look at it as more of a, when you start looking at these updates process, there's kind of two tracks that we kind of sift through. There's incremental, where we're doing these sustaining updates, if you will, to the assets that we already have. And then, of course, they're major drops, more on a quarterly type fashion, where we can introduce new outcomes, new offers, and things of that nature. right? And of course, tying it to some of the future aspects.
Yeah, one of the things I really want to kind of get out there is this is such a driven initiative that we actually, as Skype all up, have made a large investment in resources to really go and drive and build the framework and operationalize it and truly understand how to build up that practice. I think one of the things we need people when we say that it's agile and it's living and breathing is we will continue to see more tools become available to customers in all of these different phases. One of the questions that we have that we can address right now is actually somebody said, does network assessment include stress test tools like on premises, like the old stress test tool, right? And I think the piece to that one is currently the network assessment is guidance with tools to come. Do you want to kind of share on that a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah, and you can definitely, I'll give you a quick little high-level summary of it here, but definitely check out skypeoperationsframework.com/academy and grab the sessions for network readiness. They're going to cover this in much greater detail than I can right now. But essentially, our approach to network readiness is there's two levels, right? There's what we call essentials and advanced, right? Essentials is what we've included in V1, which is essentially the theory-based exercises, right? So making sure that we understand how to approach the network requirements for Skype for Business, doing our friend the bandwidth calculator, right? Getting all of those pieces of the puzzle put in play on paper so that we know exactly what we're up against, right? There are add-ons looking to come from that essentials piece, right? That can help us actually put some, bits on the wire and actually start testing things like, looking at latency and all those fun pieces. And then there are what we call the advanced section, which is where you get kind of partner-driven solutions that can get really deep into the underlying network infrastructure and start figuring out if there's a problem at the wireless level or in the core or things of that nature, right? So as we look at V1 for network readiness, we're very, very focused on the essentials piece and the essentials add-on, and the advanced pieces are going to come in the future.
So a great question that just came up was, hey, would a customer use SOF, or is this primarily designed for partners? And I think it's a twofold. So really, it's focused to design for partners to help them accelerate their cloud offering and make sure that they know how to deploy and deliver. And we're doing a lot of the core work so that they can accelerate those practices. On the other hand, there's the customer side, and there's two elements to this. Some customers might be large enough and have the right team in place to be able to utilize a lot of these resources truly to become ready and go and do this. But others, on the other hand, don't have a deep link or Skype for Business practice that really need to be able to rely on a partner. And so what they'll do is they'll use Skype Operations Framework to really build that underlying common knowledge, and then also being able to go and hire those partners that are aligning to SOF, right? So anything you would add to that, Brian?
No, I think you're spot on with that. I mean, really, the framework is designed to be consumed by all, right? It's not just a partner-specific play. There are bits of information from an assets perspective that are able to be consumed by partners, by customers, by pretty much anyone that needs to understand how to get to their journey on their journey to Skype for Business Online.
Excellent. So one of the things that we do get a question, and I want to kind of throw it out there, is where is fast track versus where does SOF come into play? And so I thought I'd address this because it's one of those ones that we're like, hey, fast track is our plan, deliver, and adopt phases, right? And you will utilize the core foundations of what SOF is. SOF, though, is really focused on that end-to-end lifecycle. So it truly takes into the operate phase, helping customers get into operate, but it also has some deeper Skype specific centric information that helps partners to take that practice and that offer to the next level, to really help customers to springboard off of what's happening with the fast track. How else would you categorize that? Anything that you'd like to add, Brian?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic take on it. And, a key point of the framework itself is that it is just that, right? It is a framework. It is designed to be extended upon by partners, by other folk that are consuming this. So absolutely, we have the folks in Fast Track do a fantastic job on their plan and deliver side of things. When you get into the operate side of things, this is where partners can really shine in what they're capable of doing, right? We're providing this framework to give them this common foundation to start from. But sky's the limit once they get to that point, right? This is really a great opportunity for differentiation to be able to take that operate phase and run with it, if you will, because we've provided this common taxonomy where we all have this foundational place to begin, and now we can start providing value on top of that.
Excellent. Well, really, I want to thank you for coming out. But what I want to do is really give the 4 key takeaways for people that are their go-dos, right? The first one, partners. As you can see, if you saw it on the slide before, you can see the top right corner. Go to SkypeOperationsFramework.com. Go and start the virtual training. It starts on Monday with an overview, which is an even deeper dive into this to specifically break down how we're going to move forward with this. The next one is network readiness. Customers and partners. Customers, go get your network ready. The key for us is that your network is in a quality position, so that when you do move to the cloud and you're really starting to take on those workloads, that it is paramount that your network is in great shape. On the other side of that is partners. Go ask the partner, go talk to your partners, find out the partners that are actually being used across the board, because or you starting to look at Skype Operations Framework and specifically around the network assessment elements, because that is actually key. The other one is making sure that when you're having a conversation with a customer or somebody within Microsoft, is that we're now building this common language that we all can understand and follow, so that if I say, hey, by the way, in the assess stage, this is what I need to look at, I think that's key for us to be on that common language, so that we can eventually really get to the fact that we'll deliver those tools and assets and get to operational excellence all the way around. So Brian, any final thoughts before you leave?
Yeah, I think the only other piece that I would add to that from an action item perspective is feedback, right? Feedback is key for us. And we want to hear from you, right? Customers, partners, everyone that's consuming SOF, we want to hear from you, right? This is our first iteration that we've just recently launched for this Skype Operations Framework. We want to hear from you. What's missing? What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? As you go to the SkypeOperationsFramework.com site, there is a section there for feedback. So absolutely bring that feedback to us, because this is really a framework that can be built upon not only by us necessarily in a vacuum, but by the entire community, right? Let's understand what those needs are, what those gaps are that we need to fill, and then we can work on prioritizing that and getting this going.
Excellent, thanks. Hey, one last thing, make sure that you fill out the pulse. Let us know if this was helpful. As well, you've got the Q&A manager there. It will stay up for a little while, so feel free to add info to it as you like. Thank you for joining us. Brian, I appreciate you joining us after a long week at WPC. But thank you all, and have a great weekend.